jury having reached a verdict, Ms. Guyger and your team, would you please stand? We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant, Amber Guyger, guilty of murder as charged in the indictment. No outburst. And it is signed by the presiding juror, who is juror number 11.
Judge issuing a strong rebuke there, but after the jury was polled, you heard the celebration of some people watching erupting in the hallway as the victim's family wiped away tears and convicted murderer Amber Guyger started crying in the defendant's chair. Welcome to the Daily Debrief, everybody. We are monitoring that courtroom in Dallas, Texas to see if there will be more discussions going into the evening for those of you watching us live here on the Law&Crime Network. We, of course, are talking about the case of Amber Guyger. She took the stand but still wound up with the conviction you just saw with the jury of 5 African Americans, 5 Asian or Latino Americans, and 2 white Americans issuing a unanimous guilty verdict earlier today. 4 of those jurors were men, 8 were women. On the stand, Guyger admitted she intended to kill the man who she thought was inside her own apartment, but who was really inside his own apartment. The victim, 26-year-old Botham Jean, an accountant who was merely sitting inside eating ice cream. Despite defense witnesses who discussed the confusing nature of the multi-story complex, the prosecution successfully argued that Guyger should have noticed the clues that she was in the wrong place and that her conduct was legally unreasonable when she pulled out her police department gun and fired. With us tonight are retired LAPD Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey and criminal defense attorneys Ecleynne and Linda Kenney Baden. Linda, also a former prosecutor. Let's jump in and discuss this verdict right now. Ecleynne, what's your reaction?
I think that the jury got it right. And the more I hear from the sentencing portion of this trial, I know they got it right. This was bad. He was a light. He could have done a lot of things. I think the prosecution did an excellent job, and justice was served.
You know, it's interesting to hear you say that, Ecleynne, because, Linda, we hear things in this phase of the case, now that we're in the sentencing phase, that, of course, we don't hear during the guilt phase because they might be too prejudicial, they're not directly relevant. Ecleynne sort of swimming outside the lane here. What's your take?
It's terrible. It's bad. If I was defense, I put my head down and hope that it ends quickly. Every witness I like the tactic of the state. They give a witness to show how awesome both of them is, and then get a witness to just show how unawesome Amber is, and it's just making their case. Before I thought she was going to get 25. Now I'm in the 90 range.
Okay, so I was actually asking for Linda's reaction to what Ecleynne said. Linda, now you get the floor.
Eckleyne's absolutely right on this, Aaron. What I thought initially was the prosecution had stayed away from the race issue on this case, going serious, just on the reasonableness. But now we're into the sentencing case, and we're into the race issue because of the comments that Amber Guyger has made, and they're terrible, Aaron. We've gone, as Ecleynne said, from a 5-year sentence to a 99-year sentence. And if there could be more, I think this judge would give more.
Okay, you know, I mean, well, it is potentially possible because it's either 5 to 99 in Texas or life. Cheryl, I want to ask your opinion on this. You come at this from a law enforcement perspective. We have a now fired police officer sitting there convicted of murder. It's extremely rare. This does not happen frequently. What's your core reaction to the verdict?
Well, I'm very happy with the verdict. And listen, by and large, police officers do the right thing. But, you know, there's a few Amber Guygers out there, and so this should give those remaining pause. Those who like to use deadly force as a first resort rather than a last resort, and then craft a story to try to make it work, should think twice going forward.
You know, hearing it that way, you're saying that this was ultimately a fair verdict, Cheryl. Is it going to give other police officers pause, and in what ways will it give them pause?
It's going to cut both ways. You're going to have officers that are going to be in Amber's camp, and they're going to think this is outrageous, and we'll hear them ranting and raving about how she was treated so poorly. But, you know, those who are tarnished when people abuse authority, abuse their authority, they're going to appreciate the fact that this now will maybe help us move forward. And really what we want to do at the end of the day is heal the tension between police and minority communities specifically. This will help in that regard.
We are watching that courtroom in Dallas, Texas to see if more arguments do indeed happen into the evening. That is for those of you watching us live on the Law&Crime Network. It's a little bit after 5 on the East Coast, a little bit after 4 there in Dallas. We're waiting to see if the jury comes back in. We do also have reaction to this verdict coming in from the 3 attorneys representing the victim's family.
This is a huge victory, not only for the family of both Jean, but as his mother Allison told me a moment ago, this is a victory for black people in America. It's a signal that the tide is going to change here. Police officers are going to begin to be held accountable for their actions, and we believe that will begin to change policing culture all over the world. It's a sad reality that this community waited on pins and needles to decide whether or not someone could be held guilty for killing an unarmed black man in his home while eating ice cream.
We did not think mistake of fact and the Castle Doctrine should have gotten in there, but what the family know today and what we feel comfortable about, there's really nothing that the defense is going to be able to appeal. They got everything that they wanted, so and they did not get the verdict that they wanted, so we feel good about that.
This jury had to make history in America today because both of them was the best that we had to offer. A 26-year-old, college-educated black man, certified public accountant, working for one of the big 3 accounting firms in the world, PricewaterhouseCoopers, for so many unarmed black and brown human beings all across America. This verdict today is for them. Amen. Everybody can raise their hand. This verdict is for them.
That was the reaction for attorneys working with the victim's family. Juries, not judges, set Texas sentences of this type, so the case has now moved into the sentencing phase, and that's what we're watching right now. Guyger faces life in prison, or as I said, a range of 5 to 99 years in prison. The first witness for the state at this stage was the victim's mother.
My life has not been the same. It's just been like a roller coaster. I cannot sleep. I cannot eat. It's just been the most terrible time for me. I'm not able to work, but I just try to busy myself just to see if it will get out of my head. But it's been very, very, very difficult. I have to try to keep the family together because everybody's in pain. I've had to seek counseling every Tuesday. I have to get a therapist to come in and help. And I try to pray and fast and do all sorts of things just to help me get by.
Prosecutors asked Amber Guyger, the defendant, if she knew she was using deadly force when she fired her gun at Botham Jean.
Yes, it was a threat at the time.
Ma'am, will you answer my questions, please?
Yes, sir.
When you shot at Mr. Jean, you knew you were using deadly force against him.
Yes.
You know what a bullet can do, don't you?
Yes, I do.
And when you shot at him twice, you intended to kill him.
Yes, sir.
All right. So all this stuff about it being a sad mistake, at the moment in time when rubber meets the road, when you pulled that trigger, you intended to kill Mr. Jean.
He was the threat, yes, sir.
Will you answer my question? When you aimed and pulled the trigger at Mr. Jean, shooting him in center mass exactly where you are trained, you intended to kill Mr. Jean.
I did.
This is back during the first phase of this case. The defense asked jurors during closing arguments to excuse Guyger's conduct as reasonable because she was faced with a perceived threat and had but seconds to react.
You get the tunnel vision. Your heart suddenly kicks in. Blood is rushing because suddenly you feel in danger. She walks up. She doesn't wait outside or anything. She's putting the fob in. It's going in. Right at that second, she sees the door that's ajar. She says, "My God, someone's in my apartment," because she left it locked. And that door's opening up. She doesn't wait around at that point and decide to charge in. It's opening up all in one motion. This is all happening in 1 second or two. and she pulls that door open and the lights are off, and she's face to face there at the end of the apartment with a figure. And her heart is beating and she is scared. It's a reasonable mistake anyone could make. And her gun is pulled out and she points it at the figure. And she tells you what she said. Training kicks in this, let me see your hands, let me see your hands. But he's moving around. That frightens her. He doesn't comply. In fact, he comes forward. He's walking. And he's saying, hey, hey, hey. All she's thinking in her mind is ignoring my gun. He must have something. He's coming to harm me. And she has to make that split-second decision. And this time it ended in tragedy.
That argument did not win this case. The prosecution rebutted the defense's argument of self-defense by saying the killing of Botham Jean was not legally reasonable.
She got to get up here and talk to you. You know? Because of what she did, this is all I can bring in. Mr. Jean can't come into this courtroom and appeal to your sympathy or to your emotion. He's been reduced to a cardboard photograph. This is not one of those things where you could just say, whoops, too bad for you, buddy, you're buried 6 feet under, I'm going on about my life. No, I've never been more proud of a position I've ever taken. Killing this man was unnecessary and it was unreasonable. It was unreasonable from start to finish. She had options outside that door when she had no danger. Options that didn't involve any violence to anybody. She didn't want to use it because she wanted to engage him. And everything after that was just a mere formality.
Let's bring everybody back into this discussion. Cheryl Dorsey with the law enforcement perspective here. Should Amber Guyger have basically abandoned her training once she was off duty? That is one of the big questions here.
No, listen, we're cops 24 hours a day. It's in our DNA. That's who we are. That's what we do. And so, granted, she was off duty, but in uniform. She had an affirmative responsibility as she would have if on duty. If she approached a structure and there was someone inside, a suspect, could have been more than one, the reasonable, prudent thing to do would be to back up because you're alone and get additional assistance, take a position of cover and concealment, and wait. There's no urgency. There was no reason for her to go in.
Linda Kenney, Baden, I want to ask you about the jury instructions in this case because this led to a huge blow up overnight on social media and whatnot. The defense got 2 instructions here, one mistake of fact, the other the Castle Doctrine, and they tried to couple the 2 together saying that it was the defendant, Amber Guyger, who could take advantage of the Castle Doctrine because she thought she was in her own home, her own castle, even though she really was in somebody else's. This makes absolutely no sense to me. It sounds absolutely ludicrous. It wasn't her castle, it was his.
That's right. And see how worked up you just got? That's exactly how people were worked up. It was ridiculous. It came back to you as you know what, bite them as you know where, okay? Because everyone's saying, wait a second, he was eating ice cream in his house. How could it protect her? 2 questions were, was her mistaking of the apartment reasonable, unreasonable, and was her use of force reasonable, unreasonable? The answer to both the juries said no, they were not fooled.
That's what it boiled down to. Ecleynne, Mercy, what do you make of it? The jury saw through the instruction that the defense thought would really help.
Yeah, and I love it. I think the judge made a real good call by just shutting all appealable issues down. They wanted the mistake of fact, you got it. You wanted the Castle Doctrine in somebody else's home, you got it. And you still got a conviction.
That's what happened. Look, I mean, this one turned into a big legal debate. We were having it here last night. We're having it again today. Appreciate the insights on that. We are still watching that courtroom in Dallas because the attorneys are still present. We're waiting to see if there are going to be more arguments as the evening rolls along. Meanwhile, still ahead here on The Debrief, R&B singer R. Kelly wants to see his lady friends. Is his custody in federal prison unfair? Also, the murder of a law professor, and conflicting testimony about how much his ex-wife may have known about an alleged plot to kill him. That case and more when we return. An attorney for R&B singer R. Kelly is complaining that only one of his two so-called lady friends gets to visit him in jail. Kelly is in jail awaiting trial on a series of federal and state sex crimes charges. Defense attorney Steve Greenberg filed a motion today complaining that Kelly has lived with the two women for some time, but that he's only allowed one unrelated person on his visitation list every 90 days. Greenberg said it's, quote, not right that both of the lady friends, that's his word, not mine, are allowed to visit R. Kelly, and that he should be allowed to go free on bail as a result. A judge will consider this argument tomorrow. A defense attorney made famous in the Netflix film Making a Murderer has been convicted after a second trial. Law&Crime brought you the first trial of former municipal judge Len Kaczynski, whose court manager, seen there, accused him of stalking and harassing her. Kaczynski was acquitted, but a restraining order remained in effect. A jury has now convicted Kaczynski of one count of violating that order, but that same jury acquitted him of two similar counts. Kaczynski said he thought he had to continue communicating with the clerk on cleanup matters related to his transition out of judicial office. Kaczynski's sentence is 1 year of probation. Now to the trial of an on-again, off-again Florida couple accused of murdering a law professor. The victim in this case, Dan Markell, was in a nasty custody battle with his ex-wife, Wendy. Prosecutors point to this battle as a potential motive for Markell's death. Neither Wendy nor any of her family have been charged, and Wendy, testifying with immunity, denied knowledge or involvement in her ex-husband's death. The defendants are Sigfredo Garcia and Catherine Magbanua. She blames him. He says he simply didn't do it. Despite ex-wife Wendy's denials, her boyfriend claims that in 2013, Wendy told him that her brother, Charlie, looked into hiring a hitman to kill Dan Markell while the wife and the victim were fighting about custody.
Wendy and I were speaking, and she asked me if she could share something with me confidentially. I told her sure. She mentioned, or she said, that Charlie had explored all options to take care of the problem, and that he had looked into having Professor Markell killed. It would cost about $15,000. I later talked to Investigator Isom and said that could have been $50,000. They sound an awful alike.
Okay, so you're not sure if she said 15 or 50.
That's right, but I'm confident she made that statement. I just can't remember the exact dollar amount. And she did state that was during the relocation battle the previous summer.
Are you aware, Mr. Lacoste, that Ms. Adelson suggested you as a possible suspect in this homicide?
Yes, I am.
And where were you when Dan Markell was murdered?
I was on the road to Tennessee.
On cross-examination, the defense for Sigfredo Garcia questioned that witness's theory. Why didn't the witness go to police after hearing this or warn Dan Markell, the victim, himself?
I don't know that it was out of nowhere. I believe preceding that was a discussion that if anything ever happened to Danny, she would move to Miami. I think I've spoken to the investigator Isom about that previously.
And listen, I have to ask Mr. Lacoste, at no point did you contact law enforcement after you heard of this threat so they could contact Mr. Markell to see if there's any need to protect him in any way, shape, or form?
I didn't.
At some point, did you ever see a picture of Dan Markell?
Sure.
Do you think that there's a resemblance between yourself and him?
Everybody always says that. When I was dating her, no one ever brought it up. I see it from the pictures. In real life, I was never told that while we were dating.
Do you feel wronged by Wendy Adelson?
Do I feel wronged?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
One of the defendants in this case, Sigfredo Garcia, is lifelong friends with the cooperating defendant, Luis Rivera. Rivera says Garcia told him in 2014 that he had a job to do. So the two of them took a trip from Miami to Tallahassee.
He said, take a ride with me up to Tallahassee and I'll give you some money.
Did he say how much?
At that moment, yeah, he did. 35.
All right, 35 what?
35,000. And my concern, I thought we were going to go rob him.
You thought you were coming to Tallahassee to do a robbery?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you assume that, or did somebody tell you that?
No, I assumed. I'm like, it was just a job. I was like halfway there, he said we're going to have to kill the man.
You said you were going to have to kill the man?
Yeah.
And what was the second part of what you said?
For some kids. That's for a lady. I guess the lady wanted her kids back. He had a piece of paper.
And where was the piece of paper?
He had it in his hand at that moment.
What was on it?
A picture of the guy on
Dan Markell?
Dan Markell.
The guy that y'all ended up killing?
Yes, ma'am.
Why didn't the murder get done on the first trip? Is it because
We lost him.
Rivera's testimony is part of a deal he reached with prosecutors to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a 19-year sentence. He's currently serving that sentence along with a 12-year federal racketeering sentence. Rivera went on to say he took a second trip with Garcia to Tallahassee when they finally saw Dan Markel at his home.
As soon as I pulled in, Garcia jumped out the car and went around. Not around, but in front of the car.
Mm-hmm.
Right behind his car and in front of the car I was driving. Went to the driver's side and shot him.
He shot Mr. Markel?
Yes, ma'am.
How many times?
Twice.
Did you actually see Mr. Garcia shoot Mr. Markel?
Of course.
Where was he trying to hide the gun?
Right in front of passenger side.
And what was Mr. Garcia's demeanor like? What was he acting like when he got back in the car after killing Mr. Markel?
He was nervous.
What happened to the murder weapon in this case?
We dumped it
Where did y'all dump it?
in the lake.
All right, what lake?
And a bridge. Ain't no telling. And one of them bridges.
All right, was it on the way between
On the way-
Tallahassee and Miami?
Yes, ma'am.
Let's go to our guests on this one. Cheryl, Dorsey, from a law enforcement perspective, this case is complicated. It must have been a nightmare to try to unravel if you're a police officer.
Well, listen, I mean, there are a lot of moving parts and everybody seems to be a character. I mean, everybody's, stepping out on the other person, but at the end of the day, who had the most motive? It would be the wife of the victim who was embroiled in this bitter custody dispute. And so she didn't have the guts to do it, and she found someone that would.
Linda, the victim's wife, said she wasn't involved and basically knows nothing about this plot. That was her testimony under immunity. Now we've got these other witnesses saying the exact opposite. Who do we believe?
So they're going to try to get a conviction here, turn them and try to convict the wife or the family or whoever did this. That's what's going on here, Aaron. So I don't know who to believe yet.
Wow, Linda Kenney Baden still making her mind up on something. And I thought you were the most opinionated person here. Oh, that was Ecleynne. Sorry. Look, we're about out of time here on the debrief. Appreciate all the opinions from all of the panelists. Court has ended for the day in the case we're watching out of Texas against Amber Guyger. That, of course, ending in a conviction. The penalty phase progressing tomorrow. We'll carry that for you then. We'll see you tomorrow starting at 9 a.m. on the network.